No one saw the sky open. It started with the clouds shifting out to form a circle. It started with a vibration, low and metallic, as if the world itself were groaning awake from a long, ancient sleep. Then the clouds above Tweed Valley folded inward like a blooming flower made of night. A slit of violet-white light yawned open, stretching wider and wider, until even the birds fell silent. From that rift came the things that did not belong on earth. They didn't fall, they crawled out. The first creatures were impossibly tall, long-limbed silhouettes wrapped in a shifting smoke-like skin that pulsed and writhed, as though 100 whispering faces lived trapped beneath their flesh. Their joints were wrong, bending in angles that made every movement sound like snapping wood. Their eyes, if they were eyes, glowed like burning embers floating in fluid darkness. People ran, houses emptied. Cars were abandoned with doors still swinging open. One of the monsters touched a parked truck, and the metal curled inward like warm clay. The asphalt beneath its feet blistered. Every step echoed like something heavy dragging a chain across stone. The townsfolk tried to hide, but the monsters could hear fear. Not their footsteps, not their breathing, just their fear. It called to them like a beacon. Once night came, they changed. They were the stalkers. They moved without a sound, boneless, flowing instead of walking. They could flatten themselves into shadows, stretch up walls, and cling to ceilings like enormous spiders with too many limbs. Limbs that sometimes weren't there a second before. One would slide its head into a doorway first, its face splitting and folding outward, exposing rows of circular teeth that rotated like gears. Another would sniff the air, its body convulsing as it tasted the panic radiating from the living. Victims never saw them until it was too late. A long hand would emerge from the dark, a whisper of their own names spoken back to them, first screaming and then silence. There were other types too. These were called the flayers. Shorter, more erratic. They scuttled like beetles, but had faces that looked almost human until they opened into spiraling maws. They had dozens of needle-thin legs that jabbed into the dirt, clicking rapidly as they hunted in packs. Their voices were the worst. Not screeches, not roars. Children's laughter, broken, distorted. As if someone had recorded playground giggles on an old tape and played it backward. Those who heard it froze, instinct, terror, primal paralysis. And that was all the flayers needed. Within hours, the valley was abandoned. Word spread that the government had a facility in the mountains, an old Cold War refuge made of alloyed steel and stone, so deep nothing could break in. The doors were sealed from inside. Only a handful of survivors made it before the sun rose again. Hundreds fled up the winding switchback roads, stumbling through moonlit forests, guided only by the screams echoing from behind them. On the second night, everything changed. The monsters learned to mimic voices. A woman wandering alone heard her husband calling her from the trees, except he had died the night before. A group of men heard a baby crying and ran toward it, only to see the cry twist halfway into a low growl that vibrated through the earth. This was how they called to their prey. They had learned. By the time they reached the mountain, the survivors inside the refuge could hear them scratching, scraping, sniffing around the metal doors. Sometimes the creatures pressed their faces against the reinforced windows. They had faces that split, unfolded, and rearranged into shapes so grotesquely alien the human mind struggled to process them. One creature stretched its arm across the glass. It didn't tap, it dragged its claws slowly. Metal screamed. The lights flickered. Something whispered from the ventilation shafts. "Let us in," whispered the monsters. The survivors covered the vents, but the whispers continued. On the fourth night, the monsters grew agitated. The rift in the sky flickered, pulsing like a diseased heart. Their bodies rippled with an unearthly hunger. Then, silence. The scratching stopped. The dragging footsteps faded. The mimicked voices ceased. The mountain facility went still. But the people inside didn't relax. No one made a sound. because silence meant one thing: they were planning something. They had to be. And far outside the steel walls, on the highest peak, the largest of the creatures raised its many arms toward the sky. The rift widened, reality bent and groaned. More shapes began to crawl through, bigger ones, smarter ones, hungrier ones. Earth had not survived the first wave. It would not survive the next. The monsters hadn't just come here to hunt. They had come to claim the world. And so that was the end of the human race. I hope you enjoyed watching, and don't forget to like and share. Thanks for watching.